War wagons were basically ordinary supply carts turned into mobile fortresses, and in late medieval Europe, they could completely change what a battlefield looked like. Instead of meeting an enemy in the open, an army could lock wagons together into a solid barrier, fight from behind cover, and protect its supplies at the same time. That made fast night charges far less reliable, gave crossbowmen and early gunners a safer way to keep firing, and forced attackers into slow, risky assaults. Here are 10 clear reasons why war wagons had such a scary reputation in medieval warfare. Number 1. A fortress that shows up anywhere. In a medieval army, a wagon was supposed to be boring. It carried tents, flour, tools, spare arrows, maybe a chest of coins. Turning that everyday cart into a fighting position was a major mental shift. A war wagon could be built with thick wooden sides, reinforced corners, and a higher rim so defenders could lean behind it like a low wall. Some had simple firing gaps or a raised platform, but even a plain, sturdy wagon instantly created cover in a world where open field cover was rare. When dozens of these wagons were parked wheel to wheel in a line, a square or a ring, they became a wagon fort, sometimes called a wagenburg in German sources. Basically, a temporary castle made in minutes, not months. Crews could chock the wheels, turn the wagon tongues outward, and lock the line together with chains or beams so it behaved like one structure instead of many separate carts. That meant an army could stop on flat ground and still fight like it had walls. For an attacker, it was frustrating because you couldn't just pick a weak spot in the landscape. The defenders brought the landscape with them. And because the wagons were part of the baggage train anyway, the defensive structure didn't feel like an extra burden. It was already on the march. Then it suddenly turned into fortification. Once armies realized they could create a safe perimeter almost anywhere, everything about battlefield risk changed. You could camp in open country without feeling exposed, rest behind wood and iron, and be ready to fight at dawn. That was especially valuable in regions where castles were far apart and open plains were common. Number 2. Night charges lose their main advantage. Heavy cavalry was terrifying because of speed, weight, and the shock of impact. A line of armored riders could break unprepared infantry simply by momentum and fear. War wagons attacked that advantage at the most basic level. They put a hard barrier in the way. If wagons were linked with chains, ropes, or beams, and the gaps were covered by spears and shields, a charging horse faced a wall it couldn't easily push through. Horses are brave, but they're not machines. They hesitate at obstacles, especially ones that look solid and noisy. Even if riders tried to force it, the charge lost its clean formation when the front line slowed, swerved, or piled up. That's a big deal because cavalry power depends on staying together. The wagon wall also bought defenders time. Instead of meeting a charge in the open, infantry could wait behind cover with long weapons ready, letting the horses come to them at a bad angle and reduced speed. Defenders often helped the wagons by shaping the ground, too. A quick ditch, a line of stakes, or even just rough obstacles placed in front to break the last meters of a charge. It didn't have to be elaborate. It just had to slow people down long enough for the missiles and polearms to do their job. Attackers then have to switch plans. Bring infantry with axes, hooks, or fire to break wagons apart, or try to find a flank that wasn't protected. Either way, the quick one hard charge and it's over option was gone. It turned the classic knights smash the line story into something messier and far more dangerous for the attackers. And once cavalry couldn't rely on the charge to decide the battle, the whole medieval balance between nobles on horseback and foot soldiers on the ground started to tilt. Number 3. Safe reloads for crossbows and early guns. Medieval ranged weapons can be deadly, but many of them have a problem. Reloading takes time. A powerful crossbow isn't like a modern trigger pull. It can take long seconds to span, set, aim, and shoot, especially if it uses a belt hook, a lever, or a windlass. Early handguns, hand cannons, and similar weapons were even slower, with awkward handling, smoke, and plenty of things that could go wrong. In the open, that reload time makes shooters vulnerable to a rush. War wagons fixed that. Behind a wooden sideboard, a shooter could crouch, reload, and step up again without being immediately cut down. That protection made slow weapons practical at closer ranges where they mattered most. It also allowed a rhythm. One row fires while another reloads, so the wall keeps sending bolts and shot without long, quiet moments. Add pavises, those big standing shields, and you get layers of cover that are hard to crack. For an attacker, the scary part wasn't just getting hit. It was realizing the defenders could keep firing steadily while you had to cross open ground. And because the wagons were stable platforms, small guns could be rested on them, making aim more controlled than shooting while exposed and shaken. Even the simple act of keeping sparks and loose powder behind cover, away from panicked crowds, made the whole gun line more reliable. Number 4. A built-in combined arms system. A war wagon wasn't one weapon. It was a small team packaged into a single moving unit. You needed drivers to place the wagon, carpenters to patch damage, and fighters to defend it. Some late medieval wagon systems assigned a set number of men to each wagon, often somewhere around 15 to 25, so every cart had a predictable mix of skills.
Inside and between wagons, armies could combine roles in a controlled way. Spearmen to stop anyone who got close, shield bearers to block arrows, crossbowmen for accurate shots, and handgunners for punch and noise. Crews might also carry polearms and hooks meant to pull riders down if they reached the barrier, plus simple tools like picks and spades to throw up a shallow ditch in front. The point is that the wagons created a clear, repeatable space where each role made sense. Open field battles are chaotic, and medieval armies often struggled with coordination once fighting started. A wagon fort simplified the problem. Hold this section, cover that gap, fire through these angles, counterattack through that opening. It's the same reason castles are scary. Defenders can organize while attackers scramble. War wagons brought that logic onto the field. When an enemy approached, they didn't face an army in a vague way. They faced locked positions with layered threats. Even if they pushed back one layer, another was right there. That stacked danger is what made the system feel oppressive to anyone trying to break it. Number 5. Defense that can also move. It's easy to picture wagons as purely defensive, like a camp you hide in. In practice, a wagon formation could be surprisingly flexible. A line of wagons could pivot to protect a flank, tighten to defend a narrow crossing, or open controlled gaps for troops to move out and strike. Some armies used a step-by-step advance. A portion of wagons moves forward, while others cover them with missiles. Then the line closes again. It's not fast like cavalry, but it's steady, and it keeps protection in place while the army changes position. That matters in medieval warfare because ground decides everything. A small rise, a muddy patch, a hedge line. These can make or break a fight. War wagons let a commander carry a favorable position forward instead of hoping the terrain cooperates. They also worked as an emergency button on the march. If scouts spotted enemy riders coming in fast, a column could pull wagons into a rough square, face outward, and buy time until the rest of the force formed up. For the attacker, that's unsettling. You can't count on catching the enemy while they're stretched out and vulnerable, because their transport can snap into a defensive shape. And if you try to circle around, you may find the wagons have already shifted to block the route. A moving wall is harder to plan against than a wall that stays put. Number 6. A protected supply base in the middle of the fight. Medieval armies lived and died by logistics, even if people don't always talk about it. Food, fodder, replacement bowstrings, spare spearheads, medical supplies, and later on, powder and shot. Without these, an army doesn't last long. The baggage train was usually the soft underbelly, and raiders loved to hit it, because burning supplies could end a campaign without winning a big battle. War wagons turned that weakness into a strength. The same wagons carrying supplies could be arranged into a secure core that protected the army's lifeline. That meant a force could operate farther from friendly towns because it could defend its own moving warehouse. It also meant the army had a fallback point. If a wing broke or a unit got scattered, soldiers knew there was a defended place to regroup, rearm, and reform. That reduces panic, and panic is one of the biggest causes of collapse in battle. On top of that, a protected wagon camp could shelter messengers, craftsmen, and even the horses that kept the whole force mobile. If attackers didn't crack the wagon base, they often couldn't finish the job. So the wagons weren't just scary in the moment of contact. They made an army harder to starve out, harder to chase off, and harder to grind down over days and weeks. Number 7. They mess with morale before weapons even land.
Fear in medieval battles wasn't only about getting hit. It was about uncertainty. Not knowing what's behind the enemy line, not knowing where the weak point is, not knowing if your own side will hold. A wall of wagons reduces uncertainty for the defenders and increases it for the attacker. From a distance, it can look like a solid fence bristling with people, shields, and pointed weapons. Add banners, drums, horns, and the sharp crack of gunpowder weapons in later medieval decades, and it becomes a sensory problem as much as a tactical one. Smoke makes it hard to judge numbers. Noise makes it hard to hear orders. Even without huge losses, those effects can shake discipline. And discipline is the core of any assault on a fortified line. If the first wave hesitates, the next wave stacks up behind it, and the whole attack loses its timing. War wagons also had a symbolic edge. They suggested planning, drill, and confidence, not a desperate mob. In the Hussite Wars, for example, wagon tactics became part of a wider message. Common fighters could stand firm if they stayed organized. To an army used to bullying poorly protected foot troops, that message could be deeply unsettling. This line isn't going to fold just because you showed up. Once that idea spreads, it changes how both sides fight, because confidence and doubt start shifting before the real clash even begins. Number 8. They let ordinary infantry stand up to elite armor. A lot of medieval warfare is about cost. A fully equipped knight is expensive. Horse, armor, weapons, training, and the social system that supports it. A war wagon system, by comparison, is built from common materials: wood, iron fittings, and the same carts used for transport. That doesn't mean it's cheap or easy, but it's a different kind of investment. It favors communities and armies that can organize labor and drill rather than just field a few rich fighters. When ordinary infantry can fight behind a wagon wall, the gap between armored elite and everyone else shrinks. A man with a crossbow or a handgun behind cover can threaten a knight in ways that feel brutally practical, even if the knight has the best armor money can buy. The wagon itself also reduces the need for heavy personal armor, because the wood takes some of the danger that would otherwise hit the body. This is one reason war wagons could feel terrifying to the traditional warrior class. They were not just a tactical trick, they were a social equalizer on the battlefield. If your status and equipment no longer guarantee that you can break the enemy, then every assault becomes riskier and every victory becomes harder. That pressure pushes armies to adapt, sometimes by building more disciplined infantry of their own, sometimes by leaning harder on siege-style methods, and sometimes by avoiding a straight attack altogether. Number 9. They control space and trap attackers into bad options. A wagon formation doesn't have to completely surround itself to be effective. Even a partial wagon line can anchor an army's flank, block a road, or seal off a gap between woods and a river. That forces the enemy to approach from certain directions, often the directions the defenders want. In medieval battles, forcing the fight into a narrow front is huge, because it cancels out numbers and reduces the chance of getting outflanked. War wagons help create choke points on demand. Attackers might find that their only clean route is a strip of open ground covered by crossbows and guns, with overlapping angles so there's no safe lane. Or they might have to dismount and fight on foot, losing the speed and height advantage they came with. Wagons can also hide movement. Troops can stand behind the line out of sight, then rush through prepared openings at the moment the attacker is tired and disorganized.
That kind of counterpunch is scary because it flips the script. The side that looked defensive suddenly hits you with fresh troops at close range. And if the attackers commit too deeply, the wagons and the defenders around them can make retreat awkward. Turning forward momentum into a traffic jam is one of the oldest battlefield disasters. War wagons made that disaster easier to trigger, especially when attackers arrived in waves and the front rank couldn't easily step back. Number 10. They grew with gunpowder and stayed relevant. Late medieval Europe was a transitional era. Bows and crossbows still mattered, but gunpowder weapons were becoming more common and the style of fighting was shifting. War wagons fit that transition almost perfectly. They gave early handgunners a safe place to work. They supported small cannons that could be mounted or rested, and they protected the powder supply from sudden raids. As firearms improved, wagons could be modified. Thicker planking, better wheel protection, stronger bracing, and more organized firing positions. That meant the concept didn't fade the moment a new weapon appeared. It adapted. It also spread beyond one famous example. Central European armies, and later forces in nearby regions, used wagon defenses as battlefield fortresses, fortified camps, and protected march formations. Even when armies started building more formal fieldworks with earth and timber, wagons still mattered because they were already there and they moved with the army. The terrifying part is that war wagons weren't a single trick you could learn once and ignore. They were a system that kept evolving with the technology and tactics of the day. If you were facing an army that knew how to use them, you weren't just dealing with wooden carts. You were dealing with a mobile field fortification that could absorb pressure, keep its people supplied, and deliver steady firepower in return, even when outnumbered.